This episode is brought to you by the Healthcare Technology Report, a leading information source on healthcare technology companies and solutions. Today, we speak with Vicky Demas, founder and CEO of Identifeye HEALTH, a company leveraging AI-driven retinal imaging to quickly and non-invasively detect diabetic retinopathy, cardiovascular risk, and early neurodegeneration. Vicky brings over 2 decades of experience developing advanced diagnostic technologies, beginning with innovations in magnetic resonance imaging, and now applying that expertise to make retinal exams more accessible and impactful. Identifeye HEALTH is building a platform that integrates retinal data into everyday healthcare, enabling earlier interventions, reducing avoidable vision loss, and expanding preventative care. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Vicky, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
You have a very impressive background in the healthcare technology space. You're now the founder of your own company, Identifeye HEALTH. Maybe for the benefit of our audience, because you have such a distinguished background, tell us about maybe your prior experiences which led to the founding of your company.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. That's very kind of you. I'll say it was not intentional to found a company, but definitely have been some critical moments in my career that led to this. First was really an early passion, I tell people, for engineering and building things and building function. A pivotal point and that is fundamental. This is how I grew up, being very close to my father, who was an engineer. It wasn't until it was after I got my PhD, had done a postdoc, and found myself working at a startup. And we ended up building a diagnostic platform. And while we were running our pivotal studies, we helped save a patient's life. It was the first time that we were building a diagnostic for infectious disease. And the standard of care was blood culture. Typically, it would take 3 to 5 days to get the results for this particular infection that we could detect in 2 hours. And the outcome was, again, saving someone's life because the general infection profile matches that of a bacterial infection, which is more common. That's the typical treatment. We were able to diagnose that the patient had fungal infection, got them treatment, and saved his life. So that moment to me was super critical because that was when I decided I really want to be someone who builds tools that help patients. That kind of just shifted from, rather than following my PhD path was portable magnetic resonance and that being the core tech, I gave that up. So I stopped being the person who is enamored by tech, and it's more of the person who's enamored by solving difficult problems that are worth solving. Mm-hmm. Another pivotal experience was working at Google, and I got recruited without background, without knowing why, without knowing what for, but it was really to help build the life sciences initiatives within Google X. And that was a place that first actually introduced me to the concept of the retina and the power of the retina as a window, not only to the soul, but also to the body and health. So I was really fascinated by that. But then also it was an incredible place where, again, you get to see when you really focus on the right problems and then you go from there to build the right team, you can get a ton of things accomplished, extraordinary things. And another critical piece to the puzzle was following colleagues and my mentor at the time to a company called Grail, and that's working on cancer diagnostics and getting a little bit of a perspective of the importance, I think, of having the right roadmap to introduce a really new tech platform that could potentially be groundbreaking from what it can do. And For anyone who knows the test gallery, I tell people anyone should get the test. And I really think it's going to change how we think of cancer, but maybe we could have thought of the entry point a little bit differently. So those were key elements in, I think, preparing me for what became Identifeye Health and figuring out how to leverage a platform that I really believed in to actually bring it and start with a very grounded use case, solve a problem that people really care about, really well understand, before we actually move to utilizing that platform to its full potential, which is where we're headed.
As you mentioned, it's a very specific case. You're examining the retina in a minimally invasive or non-invasive way. So tell us about the actual technology.
Sure. So it's relatively simple in a sense, because to your point, it's as easy as taking a selfie. I tell people eventually this is what it will be. So we have a camera, and obviously you can see today we are surrounded by great cameras. But what makes taking a photo of the retina difficult, it's not necessarily the technology of the camera itself, but it's the skill that is required. I tell people it's like sitting through a closed door, trying to make sure you're not abstracted in the keyhole by the key, that you can be aligned at the perfect spot to make sure that you can focus and capture a photo of that beautiful painting at the back wall of the room. So typically you have someone that is very well trained to actually do that. We are leveraging AI and automation to make sure that the camera self-guides and gives instructions to the patient. So that's really kind of like the first part of what makes this unique. And then, of course, in the era of AI, and I have to tell people when I say AI, I've been in the space for a long time. I don't speak of generative AI, but all like standard, like, medical image processing, et cetera, that also classifies as, right, like, standard neural networks and whatnot. But building classifiers, disease classifiers, for example, to screen for specific diseases or, as an example, is really what kind of the overall concept is about. First, we're making the capturing of the retinal image super easy, and then we're using AI to interpret the images.
Mm-hmm. And is this capturing of the image, does that occur in a doctor's office? Where does this happen?
So right now, as we're preparing to enter the market, as we speak, we are starting with the oversight of a clinician, but the person operating the device is a medical assistant. We've targeted practically someone who's very busy. We're going for minimal training, kind of just very simple usability. All of us working with the system can actually capture our own images on our own. There's a very simple app that guides you through, but for regulatory purposes, we need someone to be formally the operator. Eventually, this can be a standalone, you can imagine at your gym, et cetera, but we're starting with primary care settings, pharmacies, potentially retail clinics, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And this is such an important exam that people should go through. They probably hardly ever do the exam, or it's like very infrequent. How is it done now most prevalently?
So first of all, I'm of that school of thought that says everyone should be doing an ophthalmic screening. What's even more important is a patient living with diabetes should certainly be getting screened at least once a year, because we know approximately 1 in 3 patients with diabetes have diabetic retinopathy. Mm-hmm. It's a microvascular disease, and it is the leading cause of blindness. From that, to your point, about 60% of the people who should be getting screened are actually getting screened. The majority of them are getting screened by following up and going to an ophthalmologist. They get dilated. It's very inconvenient. Again, like inconvenient, annoying, all of the above, expensive for the payers. So there's a very small percentage of people who have tried to bring the screening closer to patients, because the lack of compliance is coming from the inconvenience that you have to have a separate appointment, lack of access, right? Like you can think a little bit. So there have been a few attempts to bring screenings in primary care, but primary care is very difficult, especially because they're so under-resourced and because people sometimes forget how important workflow integration is when they're introducing a new solution.
Mm-hmm. So presumably you've had to bring in funding to get this company off the ground and get it going. Have you had kind of investors come in? Do you have outside funding?
Oh gosh, yes, we have a lot of outside funding and we will be fundraising again in the fall. But we have some pretty incredible investors already involved and very supportive of us. I'll mention one of the more sort of like kind of like prominent VCs we have on board and on the board. Foresight Capital, as an example. So they're pretty prolific, I think, in the space, especially with AI. And yeah.
Got it. And then tell us about the team. How big is the organization? And is it primarily comprised of engineers?
We have about 40 people, and we are not just engineers. We do have engineers and data scientists, as you'd imagine, but we have quite a few, I'll call them more like operationally focused people, commercial infrastructure now, as we're preparing to enter the market. And for the record, I'm saying preparing to enter the market. We're preparing to file our registration as a medical device manufacturer and working on placements as we speak. So we have quite a bit of what you'd expect to see in a company launching their first product. So making sure that everything from your standard support, G&A, to commercial operations, pilot placement support, clinical operations. So we have a very strong PMO that is managing the majority of these tasks.
And what's been the hardest part so far about building this company?
Oof, that's a hard question. Not necessarily one profound thing. Like there's always something, right? I think being a first-time CEO, I tell people, yes, you'll hear it. I'm sure everybody says it. I've heard it a ton, but you don't appreciate everything ends with you. You have all the responsibility, sometimes not all of the control that you would feel comfortable with to support that. And that's probably just like an underlying thing. There's always a fire, but on the other hand, there's nothing that an amazing team behind a really compelling mission cannot accomplish. So overall, there's light at the end of the tunnel. You know that it's there. You believe in the team. You believe in what we're doing. So it's easy to stay focused.
Excellent. I've got a couple questions before my final two, and those happen like fairly quickly. But one is, I know it's kind of early stage in terms of the life cycle of the company, but we like to hone in on how investors add value to the company aside from the financial capital. Can you tell us a little bit about how maybe you interact with your investors and the value they provide to you?
For sure. And I 100% agree that I think, yes, we're still early, but because we're entering, again, like the market, and as I'm thinking of the next stage, relationships networking is a really critical piece. For example, I mentioned a little bit the AI side. So there has been a ton of conversation. So network is one, strategic direction, because they do have, I mentioned Foresight in particular, they get to see the space, they invest in a ton of companies. And I say the space, broadly speaking, how do we leverage AI in healthcare, life sciences? So it has been incredible to actually partner with them as we've morphed and shape and whatnot. I think in the next stage is going to be more critical as we're talking about relationships with health systems, with potentially strategics, et cetera, to get that from them. I also have been lucky enough with my existing investors, and I have everything from VCs, private equity, hedge funds, like it's like all down to the angel investors, and everyone is super supportive. So they're always open to, again, like give feedback, which again, like you have to be very thoughtful of where you engage for feedback and for what, but occasionally also for operational things like, hey, like in that portfolio company of yours, I really love X, Y, and Z that I see can you introduce me to whomever is handling something? So there's always a little bit of that network and support that you get more from infrastructure and running a company and making sure that you have access to like a back office support or you name it. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you always foresee focusing on the eye, or will this go into other areas?
So why we are leveraging the retina and we're starting with ophthalmic diseases, there's a ton we can see in the eye, and we're certainly not staying in ophthalmic. So the overall goal is to eventually get to personalized preventative healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So know that there are biomarkers for cardiovascular risk, hypertension, damage, neurodegenerative, et cetera, et cetera. And there have been a ton of publications already in this space. Obviously, there's also a lot of snake oil in the space. I'm not gonna people can jump the gun a little bit, but there are some simple analytical things we can actually do to say, well, today I can look at you and an image of your retina and assess whether that image of your retina 6 months from now shows that you're moving in the right direction, you're stable, versus you might want to check in with your doctor. So this can truly become a tool to really kind of just help patients take control of their health, working very closely with their clinicians. And it can be accessible to a lot of people because of the nature of the platform, the overall economics. And
last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Oh, just a single one, because there have been so many. The one I have to start from the start, which would be my father. And I think I mentioned a little bit my love for engineering, and he was very patient with me, which meant that I got to fall in love with engineering because he would build toys with me. So yeah.
Okay, excellent. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
So one that I've always tried, no matter how busy I am, to make sure I make time is mentoring students early on in their career while in college, especially in first generation college students. And again, giving them maybe a sounding board, advice, how to navigate, why STEM versus something else, et cetera, et cetera. But I do feel taking energy to help build the next generation of scientists and engineers is really important. And I've been super fortunate to have incredible mentors in my own career. So I feel very, very, very passionate about that.
Excellent. Well, Vicky, I want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to get to share a little bit of what we do.